Mr. Chairman. Good evening and welcome to the rebroadcast of our May workshop. Tonight we have several items on the agenda. Our agenda does call for us to start with the Pledge of Allegiance, even though it's a workshop, so we'll do that. Welcome anyone who wishes to join us. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Tonight, by request, we have invited a couple of speakers to talk to us about the power line that is proposed to be put in place to transmit power from Canada to southern New England, and we are not taking any public comment tonight. There may be some questions from commissioners, but that would be the extent of it. But we are very pleased to welcome the participants. The name of the presenter, the first presenter, is the New England Clean Energy or Clean Energy Connect company, and then we'll be pleased to also hear from the Natural Resources Council of Maine. I'm sure, somewhat differing views on some of the finer points having to do with it. We were all disoriented yesterday by bright sun, 75 degrees, warm breeze.
Yes.
But it's now raining in 46, and so we're back on board, and we'd be pleased to hear first from representative of what everybody refers to, I think, as CMP, and we'd be glad to hear from you first, sir.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my name's Thorne Dickinson. I'm the Vice President of Business Development at Avangrid, which is the parent of CMP. This was originally a CMP project, but as part of the Public Utility Commission, it actually is going to be separated out, and we could talk a little bit about that process. Yeah, Sue and I have had a chance to spend a little bit of time together in many different regulatory processes, but I think we've always had a good discussion and always tried to be very straightforward with each other. So I have two things in front of you. One is a presentation deck. The second is a little bit more detail around some visuals of the project, along with what the impacts are in Cumberland County, particularly in Pownell, where there is a little bit of work and a new substation. So first, just at the very highest level, this project initiated out of a goal of Massachusetts to increase regional greenhouse gas emissions. Now, of course, for this project, if this were to go forward, they would be accounting those in Massachusetts. But as we'll talk about in this presentation, the grid in all of New England is connected, and this project actually delivers the power right here in Maine to Lewiston, Maine. Slide 2 of the first deck, the one that has the PowerPoints, really is a good graphic to show you some of the challenges in the state, whether they're lower energy costs, emissions from greenhouse gases, or some of the risks associated with having a diverse energy supply. And I think replacing some existing oil and natural gas with hydro goes to meeting all three of those. You'll see that prices in Maine will lower. Greenhouse gas emissions will lower as you deposit this new greenhouse gas. And even in winter periods where, if you look on this graph, you'll see half of the energy needs for 2018 are already met by gas currently. But you look at a peak day, like last winter, about 30% of that need actually got met by oil, which has a higher greenhouse gas emission reduction. So by bringing new hydro, new clean energy into the region, you displace oil and natural gas and provide a more diverse supply, in addition to reducing greenhouse gases. Slide 3 shows you another of the challenges of the New England region. Many of the large plants that have been relied on for years are either closed or retiring or at what are deemed to be at risk. So this is a generation that's going to be replaced. Our view is hydro from Quebec is a great way to meet that. Increases our diversity, so we're not just relying on natural gas, which really can be a problem in the winter months, and has the benefit of significant greenhouse gas reductions. Slide 4 is a map that kind of lays out how we thought about the project. The blue line going up from Lewiston up to the Forks region, and then becoming the green line to the Quebec border, is the main part of the project. It's the DC part that brings the power from Quebec and deposits it right here in Maine and Lewiston. The blue part recognizes the 75 or 72% of the project that's along an existing corridor. So there's already a transmission line in that corridor. This would be adding 75 foot of additional width and bringing it up to the Forks. And the new section, the green section, you could see some of the conservation easements, some of the sensitive areas we're trying to avoid, and really landed on a passage where that's two large landowners, both logging companies that actively manage that for cutting and logging trails.
Go on, can I interrupt
Yeah.
you for just a second? Do you have a PowerPoint with these slides that
Yeah.
we are going to be providing a videotape of this for rebroadcast, so
Sure.
If there's some way to be sure that what you're referring to, which I can follow because you gave me a copy of it, but it'd be
Right.
great if people watching this on television would
Yeah, I'd be
able to
happy to email, if I just get the right address, and I'll email a copy of it so that everybody can have it.
Thank you.
This might be a good time to move to the second deck. This just gives you some view of the different pieces of the transmission line I was just talking about. So the first 3 slides of that deck show kind of the existing conditions. This is up in West Forks. This is part of the new location. This happened to be an area where there was already a clearing there. You can see on the second page of that what it looks like with a monopole structure. These average about 94 feet. And then the third one is after 5 years of growth. So the understory has come back into scrub shrub. And then the blue section, which I mentioned, is along existing corridor. This is actually in North Anson. And you can see the existing transmission structure on what's called page 141. And then on 142, you can see the new structure adjacent to it. Now back to the other slide deck. There are 2 other reinforcements that the project requires. One is from Lewiston to Pownell. That's just a rebuild of existing 115 kV, a lower voltage transmission. And then a new 345 from Windsor to Wiscasset. Both of these investments are called network upgrades, and they're necessary in order to allow that amount of energy to be deposited in Maine. So if you go to the next slide in the second deck, which is labeled slide 158, you see down in Wiscasset where this project comes in, the current case where you have essentially 3 transmission lines, 2 on one pole and 1 on another. And then the new 345 line would be in between those 2 areas. So those are the bulk of the project, what it looks like, the visual side of it. I think for people that have been following it closely, slide 5 is the summary from the Maine Public Utility Commission just completed their 18-month review. They have to award a certificate of public necessity, and I think this is a good paragraph. It's a 100-page report and contains many of the discussion items that NRCM and us might disagree on. But in that process, the Public Utility Commission staff, both the professional people that work day to day on this, along with the commissioners, came to the conclusion that there were substantial benefits in this project for Maine, including lower wholesale energy prices, benefits to system reliability and fuel security, environmental benefits by displacing fossil fuel generation, resulting in greenhouse gases, and they give an estimate of 3 million to 3.6 million metric tons. And that's not just for New England, that's a regional estimation, which is about equivalent to 700,000 cars off the road. And then benefit to Maine economy, they highlighted the 1,600 jobs created during the construction phase, and an ongoing basis through property taxes, which they've estimated at $18 million initially. Slide 6 is a summary of all of those benefits. This is right from the Public Utility Commission report. They show lower energy cost for Maine between $14 and $44 million. You see the net present value of $122 to $384 million for Maine. Capacity cost, which is another component of energy-related cost, they estimated at $19 million or 101 over the time period that they studied. They saw benefits in fuel and reliability and security, but they didn't quantify those. There were macroeconomic benefits both during construction and post construction. They also did describe the impacts on the host communities, and obviously with any kind of a large infrastructure project, even one with substantial benefits, there are local impacts, although they were not quantified. And they mentioned that the Department of Environmental Protection, Land Use, and Army Corps are reviewing that currently in an ongoing proceeding about mitigating the impacts of the project. I mentioned the greenhouse gas emissions in the 3 to 3.6 million, and then the stipulation conditions, which is the settlement that was reached by a number of parties, which has $250 million over 40 years. They take a net present value of that in the range of 72 to 85 million. So I think and there's a lot more information obviously on the project. I'd like to also leave time for questions. We don't pretend that this is a project without impacts, but when you look at the environmental impacts, which is essentially the reason this project was built, when you look at the economic and ratepayer benefits, just as the commission in Maine had looked at, there are substantial benefits. I thought I would highlight for the county to let you know where the impacts are in the county. So if you follow that next page, there's a graph that looks like this with a line on it that shows you a line coming from Larrabee Road in Lewiston all the way down to Pownell. The impacts in that county aren't very, very big on the transmission side. There are two structures that you can see on the following page. So if you look on the first page with the actual cross-section of the transmission line, in Pownell, the existing structure is a transmission structure with two what we call H-frame designs. All that's going to happen in this project for Pownell is that those are going to be upgraded to single pole structures. And in fact, you reduce the amount of utilization of the right-of-way as a result. And then in addition, on the following page, you'll see one other cross-section, very similar. Two H-frame structures will be replaced by two single pole structures. Now in Pownell, on the following page, there is I'll show a diagram here. This is the existing substation that already exists in Pownell. This is on Allen Road where it comes in intersection with Thicket Road. We are proposing a new station here. We estimated about $30 million for the town of new investment. We do have the right-of-way and so forth. It's part of our permit and part of our application. And then in Cumberland, we have an estimated $15 million investment at the existing substation. We don't have a shot here because it's within the existing footprint. It's a new transformer that would be going in place, and we've had a number of meetings with the town there. They were very concerned about sound, so we've built kind of a belt and suspenders approach where the transformer we're building is extremely low sound, but we're also putting a barrier around it to make sure that it's protected. And when the sound engineers look at the sound at the limit of the property line, they see no difference from what the existing sound would look like. So I went through a lot of information really quickly. I have found in these kind of a situations, questions are a better way to go, and whether you want to ask them now or after NRCM presents, I'm open to that.
We may try both,
Okay.
depending on whether anybody has any questions right now. Anyone? Steve?
Yeah, will the residential electrical consumer be able to procure Hydro-Quebec power as their electrical supplier?
Well, Hydro-Quebec isn't a retail supplier, so it wouldn't be a choice that customers in Maine would have, but they would be selling power into the New England grid. Most of that for the first 20 years of the agreement would go to Massachusetts, but there is 110 megawatts of extra supply that Hydro-Quebec could sell into Maine or to, throughout New England.
I guess what the point of my question is, Hydro-Quebec power purportedly is very low, the cost of their sale, however you want to call it, wholesale, whatever, and they can't wholesale it directly into the CMP grid?
So let me try, see if I understand your question. You're talking about that Hydro-Quebec has power that's up in Quebec, but they can't get it into New England, is that?
No, they are going to be bringing it, if this project goes through,
Yes.
they're going to be bringing it through Maine. Maine won't have direct, unmitigated access to their low-cost power.
Okay, so depending on, different people would have different opinions about the price of the power that Hydro-Quebec, that Massachusetts is paying. It's probably about 6 cents a kilowatt hour. It's actually above what the market price would be on an hourly basis in Maine. But Massachusetts is making a commitment to reduce greenhouse gases and is willing to give a credit to clean energy in order to do that. So the way I would describe it, and make sure I'm not avoiding your question, the power is actually being deposited here in Lewiston. So there's a DC line which allows you to essentially focus the energy from one point to another. So you're bringing it from Quebec to Lewiston. Once it's in Lewiston, the physics of the power system take over, and the power doesn't care that there's a contract between Massachusetts and us or Hydro-Quebec. They're just paying for it. So the Maine, I believe, gets the benefit of a free rider in a sense, because the market with the deposit of this amount of energy gets dropped lower, price gets suppressed, so all of Maine sees lower prices. Usually you have to pay something for that suppression. Here, Massachusetts is paying for it. So the power flows where it's going to flow. Even if Maine decided this is a great project, we want to finance it and fund it, the power would flow the same way that it does, that Massachusetts is paying for it.
So if I understand what you're saying is that the cost of power to the main customer will drop.
Yes. Yeah, with and without this project, and there might have been disagreements on the level of reduction, but there was, I would say, essentially unanimity that there will be a price suppression in New England when you deposit this amount of power into the region. And there's a diagram, some people find it pretty helpful. It's on page 10 of the slide deck, and it shows this idea that that you dispatch power from the cheapest to the most expensive until you meet load. And by putting essentially a zero cost wedge in here, because it's going to be paid for by Massachusetts, you're going to displace, in this case, a $40 per megawatt hour unit with instead you're going to meet that with a $35 megawatt hour unit. So Maine gets the benefit of lower energy prices without having to pay for the project. And that's also summarized on slide 6, that the first two bullets where you see those lower energy and capacity costs, it's in the $200 to $400 million range over the life of the project.
So, are you all set? Yeah. Assuming the project goes through essentially as planned or approved at the moment, without too much interference from the Army Corps, can you comment on the likelihood, possibility, scope, or possible size of any increased activity using this infrastructure 20 years out, 40 years out, whatever range you would think would be relevant?
So you're saying, as a result of this project, does it impact future development?
Is it possible, for instance, Hydro-Quebec would want to increase the volume of power sold what are the arrangements related to that, if there are
Sure.
any? What is the outlying capacity of that?
Sure.
If that's knowable.
Yeah. So Hydro-Quebec has stated publicly in a letter to the Public Utility Commission and also a recent letter to the legislature and the governor that they have essentially overbuilt their capacity. They now have too much water in their reservoirs to be able to economically get out of the region. And without a new transmission line, they're spilling water. So they're spilling water, in addition to the normal amount of spillage it takes to run a large hydro facility like Hydro-Quebec has, they're actually spilling more water than this project could provide. So with this project first, instead of spilling the water, you're going to be able to run it through the turbines, deliver it into Lewiston, reduce greenhouse gases and lower energy prices. Now, beyond that, I believe that there is still excess capacity. The mayor of New York just came out and said they want 1,000 megawatts of clean energy for New York City. There are still conversations in other areas about ability of Hydro-Quebec to develop new transmission. And I think that they have ideas of, they're going to be adding another couple hundred megawatts in 2020, another 500 megawatts in 2025. So I think there is other opportunities for additional power, however that would come into the New England area.
So this particular grid is, I assume, somehow connected to the city of New York. And is there any planning or discussion of the possibility that this power line or a companion line along this series of improvements would be used to transport that to other southern areas?
I mean, there's always a connection within the New England area, the Northeast, Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland. There is always a coordination that happens, but the losses associated with delivering it all the way across New England to the heart of New York City, I think, would be too large. I think if New York is going to get hydropower, I think it's more likely they're going to build their own connection to Quebec, or hope to.
What kind of capacity loss? I thought direct current transmission was pretty efficient.
Yeah, no, it is. It's about half the losses. If you're talking about a direct current line, there's a project on the books from TDI that would bring the power through the northern part of New York, all the way down the Hudson River, all the way into New York City. It's about $3 to $4 billion. It's pretty expensive. I'm not sure the economics are going to work once New York ran the prices. I'm not sure there's a perfect way to get the power into New York, but I think a DC line that far went through New England and then circled back around to New York, I think you would start losing the economics of that big of a distance.
I don't have anything else. Anybody?
Thorne, start to finish, how long is this project, construction to end?
It's if we receive all the permits by year end, which I think would be a stretch at this point, we would look to start at the beginning of 2019, or let's say early 2019, with a plan and completing at the end of 2022.
And the 1,600 jobs quoted in your materials and on TV, those jobs go away when the construction is done, correct?
That's right. There are some indirect benefits that continue on that view it as a couple hundred jobs. If you look at the University of Southern Maine or London Economics did an analysis, and they show maybe a couple hundred jobs tailing off in the future. But yeah, those are construction jobs
right.
That most of them, once you're done, they move on to another job.
Thank you.
Anybody else just now? We may invite you back
Okay.
for some more
All
questions later. But now we'd be pleased to hear from Susan Ely. I'm saying that right, I hope. Ely, from the Natural Resources Council of Maine.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Realize it'd be extra people, so I didn't make enough copies for everyone at the table.
Thank you.
Excellent. That's a miracle. So my name is Sue Ely. I work for the Natural Resources Council of Maine. By way of introduction, the Natural Resources Council of Maine is a nonprofit member-based advocacy organization. Its headquarters is in Augusta. They are a 501c3 nonprofit founded in 1959. We have over 20,000 members and supporters throughout the state and beyond. My role in the organization is I'm the Climate and Clean Energy Project Attorney, so I do a mix of work on anything from electric vehicles to renewables, energy efficiency, and now a lot of work on the New England Clean Energy Connect. I grew up here in Scarborough. I live in Yarmouth now, so that's my lovely Cumberland County connection. So as Thorne said, the transmission line is 145 miles. 53 of those miles are new construction, so it would be a 300-foot wide right-of-way with 150-foot cleared, where currently it is managed as active forestry land. That's one of the NRCM's primary concerns, is the clearing of this section and the habitat and wildlife impacts of that clearing. This project is very similar to a project that was proposed and actually initially selected as the winning bid in the request for proposals put out by Massachusetts. It was called Northern Pass. It was rejected by New England, the New Hampshire regulators, as having a negative impact on the communities and not providing a greenhouse gas benefit. Once the Northern Pass project was rejected, the second bid that was selected from the Massachusetts request for proposals was the New England Clean Energy Connect, and that's how we've got here today. As Thorne said, it's received an initial certificate of public convenience and necessity from the Maine Public Utilities Commission. That decision has already been appealed by NextEra Energy, so that appeal is pending. The other project approvals are still needed from the Maine Department of Environmental Protection, the Land Use Planning Commission, the U.S. Army Corps, the Department of Energy, and then local municipalities. Actually, I'll stop here for a second. At times, this project is proposed as a choice between no energy security. This is necessary for energy security. It's this project or a natural gas pipeline. There's dire predictions. I want to wind us back and remind the folks who may not be familiar with this project that this is a proposal that came out of a Massachusetts law for climate emissions reductions. The bidding process was open. 46 different bids were put forward. Everything from these 100% large-scale hydro projects from Hydro-Quebec. There were 3 projects that were going to bring power from Hydro-Quebec into Massachusetts. There was one in Vermont, one in New Hampshire, and one in Maine. And then the remainder of those projects were a mix of different types of renewable energy projects. So there are lots of really great ideas out there that don't necessarily involve getting 1,200 megawatts of hydro from Quebec. It just so happens that the one that was chosen and that we're dealing with now is this project. So there's lots of other opportunities and options out there that don't involve this project from Hydro-Quebec. The 3 main reasons that the Natural Resources Council of Maine is opposed to this project and is concerned about this project is that it will have dramatic impacts for wildlife in the Northwoods. We also have seen evidence that it will negatively impact Maine's in-state renewable energy development. So for every job on the New England Clean Energy Connect transmission line, there's impacts on Maine's in-state renewable job economy. So the folks installing large-scale solar installations, wind installations, and other renewable energy industries, if those economies are suppressed because of this project, those jobs will be suppressed, and those cascading environmental benefits and economic benefits will be suppressed. So it's a give and a take. The other thing is that, contrary to what Mr. Dickinson believes on the climate front, we want to look not just at global at emissions in New England, but we want to look at global emissions. Reducing emissions in Maine or Massachusetts will not affect global climate change emissions if there is a resulting increase in another district. And so if our project here in Maine reduces greenhouse gas emissions in Maine, but because the energy is being diverted from some other jurisdiction, you're going to see an increase in another jurisdiction and a decrease in Maine, meaning there's no reduction in global greenhouse gas emissions. So one of the things that we've been looking for and have not yet found is a study that would look at what the global greenhouse gas impacts of this project are. All of the studies that have been done so far have only looked within the political boundaries of New England. And so the Public Utilities Commission hired an expert, London Economics. They didn't look at what the impacts of the emissions would be from other districts. So if the energy is diverted from Ontario or New York in order to fulfill this energy contract here in New England, would that result in an increase in global emissions or a zero? So we do all this work, we have all this impact to Maine's Northwoods, and we don't get any greenhouse gas emissions reductions. The London Economic Study didn't look at it, and neither did Central Maine Power's experts. Nobody has done an analysis of what the global emissions impact will be from this project. So all of those estimates of regional greenhouse gas emissions are just that. They're only looking at New England. They haven't looked out what the ripple effect of this project would be. So to get a little bit more into depth, our concerns from a site impact, and recognizing that I'm here in Cumberland County, the impact in Pownell is, I'm not talking about the transmission infrastructure here in Pownell. I'm talking about the 53 new miles stretching from the Canadian border down into Caratunk. This is working forest, so it is a working forest. It has been cleared, but the impacts from forestry operations is very different from permanent clearing of a linear 150-foot wide transmission line. With the forestry operations, they're cut, they grow back, they cut, they grow back, and they're part of a larger mosaic of working forests. So as things are cut, other places are growing back, and then they're cut again. So it's more of a patchwork. It's easier for habitat and ecosystems to adapt to that and not have as large of an impact. When you have a long linear structure, it's much easier to see, excuse me, impacts from invasive species or blowdowns or impacts of edge effects, because you have this long linear cut right through the habitat. Despite the fact that this is a working forest and has been harvested, it is also part of a globally significant temperate forest. So if you look at a worldwide map, this is the largest intact temperate forest in the world. So it has an incredible ecosystem benefit, and these types of linear structures really will cause a negative impact on the habitat. It crosses wetlands and streams. When you clear for these types of clearings, the sunlight comes in, it warms the streams, it makes the wetlands less hospitable to species that are dependent upon those habitats. It will have an impact on a very large number, hundreds of brooked out streams. It impacts bird habitats, vernal pools, deer wintering areas, and then of course the scenic and recreational value of the area. And as Thorne recognized, the Public Utilities Commission did raise that as a concern. This region of the state depends very heavily on their scenic and recreational tourism industry. It's a four-season industry. So you're getting your rafters, your hunters, your fishing crew, and then snowmobiling. And as we all know, those clearings are even more visible in the wintertime because you lose your foliage and your screening effect. And so it does impact all those four seasons and will have a negative impact on the tourism and recreation industries in that region. I've touched on this a little bit, but when we're talking about global greenhouse gas emissions, we want to take a global view. The contracts as they're written with Massachusetts, the way it's structured is that there's 3 different electric distribution companies that have signed contracts with Hydro-Quebec to purchase the power in Massachusetts. So they had to set, of course, this law was geared to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So in order to do that, they needed to say what's the baseline and where do we want to go. And so what they did was they set a threshold of how much more hydropower needs to be imported to have an impact on climate emissions. Unfortunately, in writing the contracts and in negotiating the contracts, those thresholds were set very, very low. So low, in fact, that even if Hydro-Quebec meets the threshold level targets in the contracts with the 3 distribution companies in Massachusetts, they still won't hit where their import levels already are coming into New England. And so they can still satisfy the terms of the contract and import no new hydroelectricity into New England at all. So we could be talking about a large transmission line being built with no new hydro energy entering the New England market. It's possible that they could still continue to sell a lot more energy on the spot market and fulfill this line. I don't know, but there's nothing in the contract that would force them to do that. So they can be completely in line with their contracts and import no additional hydropower into New England. And in that case, we wouldn't have those greenhouse gas benefits that are being talked about. It's entirely up to Hydro-Quebec. And what's going to make the decision for Hydro-Quebec is where they can make their money. So it may be economically viable for them to do that. It may not. The other thing is that those projections of spillage and excess energy are based on projections into the future. As recently as 3 or 4 years ago, Hydro-Quebec actually ran a deficit in their reservoirs. So in order to make the projection that they're going to have sufficient water flow to fulfill all of their existing contracts and the NECEC and their existing levels that are already flowing into New England, and the New York contract. I mean, the New York contract hasn't even been figured into these numbers. They need to maintain their energy growth at a near zero amount, so no new load growth in Quebec, and have abnormally high water flow into the foreseeable future. This is not, it's not certain that they're going to continue to have high water years over and over and over again. Those estimates are based on what they predict as excess rainfall due to climate change. So that's an incredibly uncertain projection, both on the load growth side and the water side. We just don't know what's going to happen. And so to say that this is always going to be excess is a very large leap. So we don't believe that there's a likelihood that they're going to continue to have this excess energy. And we also just don't think that the contracts just don't require them to bring new energy into New England. And so if it doesn't require it, how can we be banking on it? So we are afraid that there will be no climate benefits from global climate benefits from this project. Finally, again, I've touched on this a bit, impacts to renewable energy in the state of Maine. The renewable energy industry here in Maine is an incredible resource. It creates jobs, local tax base. This is an important industry for Maine to support. And as Thorne has said, this is likely to cause price suppression in Maine, at least initially. And if that's the case, that is going to hinder all of Maine's energy industry. It's lower prices. So we believe that there will be a price suppressive effect on Maine's renewable energy industry, but also a constriction. So it'll be more difficult for renewable energy producers in the state of Maine to get their energy into the larger New England market because we have a long stringy transmission line and we only have one point to get our energy out of Maine at the Maine-New Hampshire interface. So if that's the case, we are likely to see that Maine's renewable energy industry is less competitive. these are good jobs. These are good paying jobs. These are good projects. And unlike a transmission line that has a sort of a large lump of jobs that are over in a couple of years, these renewable energy projects are a clump of jobs and then another project and then another project and another project. So it's more of a sustainable industry that has certifiable greenhouse gas emissions reductions. We know this solar panel is going to displace this much fossil fuels. This wind turbine is going to displace X amount of fossil fuels. And so it's verifiable greenhouse gas emission reductions, it's verifiable jobs in the state of Maine. The jobs that are going to come from the DC line from Quebec down into Lewiston, that's a very highly specialized labor force. These are jobs that are unlikely to go to the large part to Mainers because we don't work on DC lines. This is a specialized set of job criteria. So I would throw a caveat to the jobs numbers that these aren't guaranteed. In the settlement that CMP made with some of the other parties that settled at the PUC, they wrote a clause that said they'd do their best to give these jobs to Mainers. But this is a specialized workforce. And so it's unlikely that we have the specialized workforce here in Maine to get those jobs. I would argue that the renewable energy jobs they're here. We have a lot of really highly skilled workforce that can do those jobs, and we should nurture that industry. And finally, the public opposition to this project is strong and growing. We did a recent poll, 65% of Mainers opposed this project. In Franklin County, the numbers are much higher. 15 towns have either rescinded their earlier support or have come out to actually oppose the project. The Sportsman Alliance of Maine, the Franklin County Commissioners, and a number of other organizations have again either rescinded their earlier support or have decided to oppose the project outright. Just anecdotally, we have a petition on our website. It has over 10,000 signatures opposed to this project. It's very hard to get 10,000 people to sign anything. So this is an incredibly unpopular project. And of course, it faces many more hurdles going forward. That's it.
And questions? Tom?
Yeah, I still don't quite understand how this project is bad for renewables.
So it is.
Is it just because it might make electricity in Maine cheaper, and then therefore, so you would be better off. Renewables would be better off the more natural gas is used. That's the most expensive thing on our chart.
So
here.
there's sort of two forces.
Oh, okay. I'm just having a hard time
Yeah,
connecting.
no, so there's the one force is yes, there's a pricing impact. You have this lower price. The other piece is that this project, and again, Thorne and I don't necessarily agree on this point, but it is using up a lot of the space on our transmission lines. It's competing for space at the interfaces with other projects that want to tie in. And it could be any project. It could be a biomass project, it could be a wind project, it could be a natural gas project. But any energy provider that wants to tie into Maine's infrastructure has to be able to get to market. And what this project is going to do, it's 1,200 megawatts. It's a large slug. And so it will make it more expensive for those projects that follow the NECEC in the ISO New England queue to be able to afford the cost to upgrade the infrastructure enough to get in. Now, some people might categorize that as just the competition of the marketplace, and if, you move your feet, lose your seat, first in line gets the best spot. But again, this is a question of, do we want to be supporting this project over a project that was grown in Maine, supplied with Maine workers, that will have verifiable impacts on the climate? We would argue that that's what we should be looking for, not this infrastructure project coming from Canada.
Okay, I'm just noting on the information that I have, obviously the cheapest, I'm not sure what is this,
the cheapest power is hydro. I mean, essentially, no fuel is burned for that. Then the next the next one up is renewables. I mean, it's like it seems to me that you should be allies in this and not just economically, you're benefiting for the same slice of the market, which is who can produce the most power the most cheaply.
Right,
And so I'm just, I mean, if it were a matter that solar would need to be subsidized, which I think the cost of solar panels has come down so much and is continuing to trend downwards that eventually you're going to, you're in renewables are in the sweet spot already. I mean, they're going to keep getting better and better. There's, solar is the new thing. I mean, most of the towns that I have anything to do with have massive municipally owned solar farms now. They've just come online. Portland just came online, last year or this year, and South Portland came online a couple of years ago, and I know that's happening. I'm just kind of puzzled why that's an argument. It just doesn't seem to quite click for me. So I mean, if it's the part about how much capacity there is in the system, that I have absolutely no way of judging that. I mean, Thorne said it's a matter of physics. Well, okay. I mean, then I don't understand. I don't understand that at all. But this is what I mean, thank you for explaining it. But I'm still not seeing it. But
I mean, the upgrades part is if a project wants to come online, there's a certain amount of cost to tie into CMP's infrastructure or Amerimain's infrastructure. If that it gets incrementally more expensive as that space gets used up, right? That
okay, sure.
Right, and so if the NEC comes online, the ones in queue after it will have to pay a lot more to tie into the existing infrastructures, which would then impact that amount you're talking about, because you're having to build that extra cost into the cost estimates. The other thing about CMP's chart there is they're looking at, first off, it's just a snapshot in time of energy prices. There's no guarantee that second band of hydro is even going to be available, because that band of light blue hydro in that map, that's Hydro-Quebec. That's what Hydro-Quebec's already providing to New England. There's no guarantee that band of hydro is going to continue to be available if they're getting to sell it through the NECEC, where they're getting a considerable markup from Massachusetts. So that also will change the economics.
So,
Thank you.
I too am a little mystified about the order of magnitude of what you were just talking about, and whether this sounds like kind of a crowding out phenomenon is likely under current conditions or with the changes that this infrastructure would bring. And unfortunately for the rest of the world, I guess, there's a lot of municipal officials around southern Maine who know a little nothing about this, because we own an energy plant over at Eco Maine that I was on that board a few years ago when we hooked up to a line on Outer Congress Street and sold our power to Texas. So, and we sold it pretty cheap, too. It was a recession, and we didn't get much money for it. We weren't very happy. But we're kind of familiar with the fact that the physics of the matter is don't touch that wire, because it might be going to Texas.
Right.
But I am kind of surprised to hear you say that the contract does not require Hydro-Quebec to deliver electricity beyond what they already deliver, and I'd be glad to hear from both sides on that, because it does sound like that's either the realistic assessment of it is that that's not really an issue, or it's a victory for form over substance. And so I'd be glad to hear what you have to say, and maybe we can ask If nobody else has any first questions for you, maybe we could ask Thorne to address that.
Sure. Yeah, and I would just say, from the renewable energy piece, the Maine Renewable Energy Association is opposed to this project. And so they have raised these same concerns that I've raised about impacts suppressing Maine's renewable energy industry. And so, I probably should take some of these questions back to them and see if they can give a better answer. But just for what it's worth, the Maine Renewable Energy Association is opposed to this project. And then on your question about the contracts, and I guess Thorne will talk about the spot market, so I'll just let you get that. But, this last year, approximately it was 18 terawatt hours of imports into New England from Hydro-Quebec. They came in through different places, a little New Brunswick, a little bit through Vermont, a little bit through New York. But it's Hydro-Quebec energy coming in at 18 terawatt hours. The contracts, there are 3 different contracts. 2 of them set the baseline to beat at 3 terawatt hours, and one of them sets it at 9 terawatt hours. So even if you have another 9 terawatt hours coming in, using the highest number, you're still at what they're still only required to deliver what they're already delivering to New England. So there's just no guarantee that there's going to be anything more. The Massachusetts Attorney General raised this issue in briefing. They had to do a proceeding on these contracts in Massachusetts in front of the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities. The Massachusetts Attorney General raised this issue in their briefs. The issue has not, the case hasn't been decided yet, so the Massachusetts AG raised the issue. Acadia Center raised the issue. Sierra Club raised the issue. So it's been raised. I don't know what the resolution is going to be, whether they'll make them redraft the contracts or do something. But as of right now, the Massachusetts Attorney General has sounded the alarm that this could, in fact, not result in any additional hydropower flowing into New England grid.
Do you know whether they're required to pay for this infrastructure regardless of whether the power delivery increases? Whoever is paying for it?
So that's what the contract would say. Yeah, so if they, as long as they comply with the terms of the contract and the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities agrees, that's what the contract is.
So is your point that it is possible that if they only delivered what the contract required, that what the danger is that would be power that would have otherwise been delivered anyway through a different transmission process?
We've gone through all of this rigmarole. I lost a year and a half of my life. And we're digging up the North Woods. We're not getting anything extra. We're not getting the climate benefits that we're talking about. And so, from that perspective, you're not getting the benefits that are being sought after under this Massachusetts law.
I understand. Commissioner Gordon?
You got something?
No, I'm all set.
I have a couple of things I'm trying to get in my head, but as I understand it, if Hydro-Quebec power comes into this region, the renewable energy market will be put at a disadvantage because they can't compete with the power costs that Hydro-Quebec will bring in. Is that correct?
Well, it's a set cost under the contract, and so it would be what the contract cost is. But it also is likely to cause even more congestion in Maine. And so it's a combination of cost and congestion. And so yes, it's a little bit cost, it's also congestion.
And if forgive me for being blunt, but it would seem that if that's the case, then it's the residential consumer that's picking up that additional cost.
Can you say it again?
If you bring Hydro-Quebec power in at its lower rate into the region and it suppresses the energy cost, that puts the renewable energy market at a disadvantage because they'll have less to compete with, less margins.
So that's part of it, but there's also this connection cost. So it'll cost more to connect. So the line you can't tie into this line that's being built because it's a DC line. So no wind or solar projects from the region can tie into this line. And it will cost more for them to tie in at the Lewiston station. So it'll be more expensive for a wind or solar farm to get its power to the grid. And so that's where the extra cost is coming. That's where the cost disadvantage is coming.
Fair enough. But likewise, they haven't shared any expense of bringing that line into the.
No, this
Lewiston.
project would be paid for by Massachusetts ratepayers.
Right.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that the renewable energy market is not sharing in any of the costs to bring that line in.
No, yep.
The second thing I'm having trouble with is I don't understand the mass balance analytical issue. And I'm talking about CO2. We're adding electrical energy into a consuming region, lowering the CO2 emissions generated by eliminating some generated power. So I don't understand why that, in fact, is not lowering the CO2 emissions.
It depends on whether or not that, okay, so one is if they're actually, if Hydro-Quebec reduces the imports that are already coming on the spot market, there's no need to reduce any generation in New England because we're switching the hydro import from the spot market into a firm contract through the NECEC. So that's one scenario where you wouldn't have any imbalancing. I'm not saying that that's the most likely scenario, but I'm saying that's a possibility under the way the contract's written, is that you just move the hydro from the spot market to the NECEC. So that's one scenario. If you have some reductions in greenhouse gas emission generation sources as a result of this project, there has not been an analysis to show whether or not that power is getting diverted from some other regions, from an Ontario or New York or New Brunswick. And if that's the case, what is the energy source that's going to offset that energy that's being shifted into New England, assuming that they're actually increasing their imports to New England? It's a skeptical nod.
I finally understood at that time, that part of it.
I could just, and Sue, I mean, feel free to stop me at any point, but I was just going to make a couple of points.
But I think our first round with Sue is about done. Don't go too far.
Right.
Okay. Well, we
Did
can
you want to
start there.
respond to a couple of those points? So on the first being the proposition that this might be nothing more than a transfer from the spot market to a contract market, A, and B, the power displacement, and I suppose this gets to the nub of the environmental benefit issue. If it is a replacement of, or a transfer of power that would otherwise serve another region, would the makeup capacity in that other region have fossil fuel entanglements, or would what would be your supposition about what would happen in that scenario?
Sure. Just before even I start that, again, there's the Public Utility Commission's report now. NextEra, who has an incentive to keep energy prices high, has appealed the decision. But in there, for anybody that's interested, they go through each of the arguments that Sue has made. You can see the discussion from all the parties. All of these same arguments were made at the Public Utility Commission. The Public Utility Commission didn't agree with them. In the end, the Public Utility Commission, not just looking at the initial studies that were done by London Economics and by Daymark, but they asked their expert opinions on surplus of power, on information that came into the proceeding from Hydro-Quebec, on modeling that we did, and they looked at that full record and said, this is incremental. And this will provide not just reductions in greenhouse gases to New England, but for the whole region. So that's the Commission's conclusion. These arguments were made at the Public Utility Commission, and Sue's right. The same arguments were made at the Department of Public Utilities in Massachusetts. I think in the end, they're not going to agree with those arguments, and they'll approve the agreement in Massachusetts. But I would encourage you, and some of the quotes are in the backup pages where you can see the Commission's conclusion. And the same is true on the renewable area. That was the point I think you're making is right. If energy prices were double what they are right now, it's great for renewable energy developers, terrible for Maine customers, right? So Maine customers want to see lower energy prices. It would be an argument against any renewable energy if you're going to argue that any new price is going to suppress prices. Any new project, a solar project, would suppress prices, which makes it harder for the next solar project to compete. That's a way to interrupt any project, and I think we need all of these answers to kind of tackle our problem. And then the last one on the headroom that Sue was talking about access to the market, again, the commission listened to those arguments and concluded that that's not the case, that there was no reduction in headroom because of the investments that are being made in the system. So,
Can I rephrase that
Yes.
so I understand it? The belief is that the infrastructure that's being installed as part of this project, which is not being back charged to main providers necessarily, or will in fact expand the capacity enough so that the displacement that she has talked about is unlikely.
yeah, that's right. That's right. The project is $950 million. A little more than 200 of it are these upgrades to the transmission system to create more headroom.
Yeah, and what about the issue of Hydro-Quebec not importing energy through this line?
That's right. So there's a bunch of evidence in a very long proceeding. This was one of the most discussed items within the Maine Public Utility Commission conclusion, which their conclusion was that's not going to happen. This is going to be incremental energy for the region. I think the simplest way is the fact that Hydro-Quebec is spilling huge amounts of water. 10 terawatt hours that they spilled last year, in addition to their normal operations that they have to spill, is about enough water to meet about 80% of Maine's load. That's how much water they spilled. Their own CEO, in an interview with Quebec News, said that was worth about $500 million for them. So they have a situation where their reservoirs are full. Some of it, there have been a couple of higher rain periods. Some people are arguing it's climate change, others are not. But we're talking about a company that's added 5,000 megawatts in a recent period of time to their hydro capacity, and they can't get it out because of lack of transmission. Those reservoirs are filling up throughout Quebec and the water is spilling. To me, that's the simplest way to look at this, is with this line, water that would have been spilt is going to run through the turbines, be delivered over the power lines, and reduce gas and oil generation.
And that was 500 million?
500 million, yeah. 500 million would be about 5 cents a kilowatt hour times 10 terawatt hours. And if you're interested, it's in a couple of the public records, the actual interview with the CEO. And if people are interested, the letter that the CEO from Hydro-Quebec just recently delivered to the governor and to the legislature on the same issue.
Anyone else? I'll give you 2 minutes to wrap it up, each one. You go first.
No, I think for the longest time, we've been out there arguing CMP's perspective on why this project is good for the state. And I think now, on May 3rd, when the Public Utility Commission came out with an 18-month review of all the people for and against this project, including some generators that have an ulterior motive of not making sure that nothing gets added anywhere at any time in order to keep their prices high. You can go to that Public Utility Commission and see a careful weighing of the benefits. And again, we're not pretending that there aren't impacts associated with the project, but whether you're someone that cares about climate change, whether you're someone that cares about economic growth and jobs in Maine, or whether you care about reduction in energy prices, I think there's something in the project.
Thank you. Susan?
As Thorne said, everyone's got a dog in this fight. Everyone's got something to win and something to lose. CMP and Hydro-Quebec have a lot to gain from building this project. They get to earn a return on every square foot of infrastructure that they're building in the state of Maine. So this is an incredibly lucrative project for CMP. It's a lucrative project for Hydro-Quebec. Hydro-Quebec has not been involved in any proceeding in Maine. They were part of the DPU proceeding down in Massachusetts where this information came to light, but they haven't been available for questioning or cross-examination at the Public Utilities Commission, at the DEP, or the LUPC. The claims of spillage and this wasted energy, there's been no study, there's been no analysis, there's been no opening of the books to show when the spillage is happening, where it's happening, under what circumstances it's happening. There's no proof. There's letters, they've gone to the editorial boards, but there's been no ability to say, hey, what facility is this coming from? What time of year is it coming from? Spillage happens for a number of reasons. It happens for environmental reasons, it happens for economic reasons, it happens for transmission reasons, it happens for fluke in weather event reasons. You have to fill your reservoirs before winter so you can have enough energy to feed energy to your population through the wintertime. If you then get in a massive rainstorm, you're going to have a lot of spillage. And when you add up those megawatt hours tumbling over the dams for a couple of hours, it sounds like a lot. There's no evidence out there to say that this energy would be available for us to use at the hours that we need it in a format that we can use it. Spillage doesn't happen in that large of a volume because of a lack of transmission capacity. Their dams aren't built to capture that much energy. There's a lot of factors that are going into it. None of those have been cross-examined or evaluated. The fact of the matter is that this, despite an 18-month investigation at the Public Utilities Commission, the Maine Renewable Energies Association is still opposed to this project. Environmental organizations are still opposed to this project. Citizens and town leadership throughout the length of the project are opposed to it. And people want more answers about what exactly is happening in Hydro-Quebec, what the environmental harms are going to be, what the climate impacts are going to be, and what the financial ramifications are going to be. And so, I would say, don't take the Public Utilities Commission Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity as the end-all be-all. That's just one piece of the permitting puzzle, and that this is a really big project with really big impacts on the state of Maine and citizens, and to just proceed with caution is what I would ask.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Very informative.
And for anyone that's interested, we expect that this will be rebroadcast by various local and municipal public access channel presentations, usually over the course of the next month or two. This will be replayed a number of times, so we thank our participants. It was enlightening. The questioning from the commission, of course, displayed just how difficult it is to understand and appreciate the nuances here. So,
I appreciate it just because it's been a chance to actually understand better what the issues are. This body has no impact, no part in this, other than just our own personal thoughts, but the Cumberland County government doesn't have any regulatory authority over any part of this project. So we're not sitting here as decision makers. But I really thank you. And having said that, I thank you very much for both sides for coming out and talking to us. It's been very interesting and helped enlighten me quite a bit.
Thank you.
yep, thank you. And you're welcome, of course, to stay and as we puzzle our way through the cross-insurance arena budget and the jail, and I'm sure that's why most people are here, so. But we will take a 2-minute break before we go into that.
Anybody want to?
And we're back, and our next agenda item, we'll ask the county manager to introduce the item. We're discussing budgets this evening.
Yes, thank you. The first budget that we'll tackle this evening is the cross-insurance arena. As the commissioners know, in November of 2017, through a state statute change, a special law change up at the State House, County of Cumberland got a greater review and incorporation of the cross-insurance arena that had always somewhat sat outside of the county organization. It is now considered a department within the county organization. With that, that allows for almost a double review of the budget, because there's still the Board of Trustees that still functions in a advisory role in these days. But there are 9 trustees that are appointed, and they have gone through a process of reviewing the budget, asking staff the tough questions, and ultimately making a recommendation to the county commissioners. They bring forward a positive recommendation of this budget for 2019 to 2020, and ask that you review and approve. Today, we have a few slides. I think there's 4 slides that Melanie will present, talking about operational side of things. We will then jump into the capital slide, and then the last slide of the slide deck is the trustees' budget. They do have a budget. It is a budget that is going somewhat down, but there are some things that we still need to participate in relative to cost and allocate costs to certain cost centers. So I'm going to pass it off to Melanie at this point to start off on slide 1 and offer any introductory comments.
Hi, good to see you guys again. I know some of you guys have already heard my spiel and others haven't. But kind of the way that I do this is this first slide is a 30,000-foot view of everything that's in your packet. For the packet that's sitting in front of you, we're going to work off of this main page that has a bunch of colors. It is color-coded, and I'll kind of highlight those as we go along. But I try and make this presentation as user-friendly as possible. Not for you guys, primarily more for myself to work through the numbers, but it works out well when I'm talking to everyone else about it. But just so we don't have to go back to this first slide, if you look at the summary page that you guys have down the left side, there are several green boxes. Each green box is going to represent one of the line items up here. So as we're going along, we won't stay on this slide, but you guys at least kind of know where we're at in the process, and you can ask any questions. We can certainly go back to this slide, but for the sake of not flipping a bunch of pages and slides, that's what the green boxes mean on that page. And then also to kind of educate everybody of how our company works, when we kind of put our first draft of the budget together, Mark and myself, we will present it to my boss, Chris Lawrence, who some of you guys have met. Once he vets it, and when I say vets it, once he rips it apart, asks a bunch of questions, we revise it, and then we present it to our president as well as our chief financial officer, and then they will rip it apart, ask questions. If we need to patch it up again, we'll do that. But as I go along, I'll kind of let you guys hear some of the questions that they asked me, just so you guys kind of have an understanding of some of their thought processes, any questions they had with the numbers. But the first line item that we have got is the number of events. If you look at that first green box that we've got there, one of the first questions that corporate asked me, and you can actually go to the next slide, Jim, was why has your event load gone down? If you look, there is we have 19 less events. What it's showing is 19 less events than we did last year. So this upcoming year, we're expecting to have an event load of 102 events. One of the reasons that variance is there is because our overall event mix is different. The events that we brought in last year, the overall deal structure is different. And what I mean is that Paw Patrol is a great example of that. Paw Patrol, we had 4 ticketed events for them. In addition to that, they were also in the building for 10 tech rehearsal days. So anytime there is an event of any nature in our building, we are charging them rent to actually be in the building, but it's not a ticketed event. However, for us, whether it's a rental deal or it's a ticketed event, it is always considered an event day because we have somebody utilizing the building. So Paw Patrol, since they had 10 tech rehearsal days as well as 10 ticketed events, counted for 14 events for us. In addition to Paw Patrol, Arena Football is no longer returning. They also had a rental deal for us. So that's why you're seeing some of that variance right there. What we're replacing that with is going to be Cirque du Soleil. We've got 7 shows for them. They're going to be ticketed shows. And then we're also getting an additional Sesame Street that is going to be coming. So the question that I got was, since how is your event mix going down, but your ticketed revenue is going up? And so part of that was the overall event mix that I just explained. But if you guys look down at the yellow lines that are highlighted on the paper in front of you, that's representing $947,000 worth of increased ticketed revenue. And so that's how I can look at them and say our event mix overall is going down, but our gross ticket revenue is going to be increasing. The slide that's up here is a representative of all of the events that we have coming in the arena for the upcoming year. Two of the line items for us is always a hot topic is the projected number of concerts. That one is definitely a variable for us. In the past year, we had estimated to get 7 minor concerts and 2 majors. Based on my conversations with different promoters that I've had, I would have this projected at 4 minor concerts and 2 majors. One of the things that, one of the primary conversations that I've had with promoters is that the concerts that are going through the secondary markets, there's not a huge influx of the amount of concerts that we're seeing that are coming to secondary markets being us. Primary markets are going to be Philly, your Bostons, the major markets like that. So they're aware that there is a shortage, if you will, of concerts in general that are going to secondary markets. Also keep in mind, as we categorize major and minor concerts, it's based on the amount of net revenue that we see with them. And so concerts can also be comedy shows for us. If you guys remember, Jeff Dunham came in through this past year. We don't have a comedy line item that in there falls for a major, in the major category based on the net revenue. One thing in here I know is, just to, as a little side nugget, is hockey. I know that's been a great thing to have in the local community. In speaking with Adam, he's looking at an overall 8% growth in his overall full season equivalents. Going into this past season, he started out at about 600 full season equivalents, and he's projecting that this summer they'll get almost to about 1,100. One of the things that they get to spend time doing this summer isn't looking for office space, isn't trying to get internet or hire staff. They actually get to kind of work on growing the business. Outside of full season equivalents, they're looking at the individual ticket buyers, really kind of specializing the game promotions. A great example of this is going to be, for me, kind of, I think, pulling a silver lining out of 2 recent tragedies that the community have had with the firefighters and the police department. I think when we get the hockey schedule, being able to, during some of the hockey games, maybe do a Battle of the Badges night where we get to honor the 2 fallen officers at those games. And so you really kind of get to gear up the marketing piece as you're going through and looking at individual ticket buyers, group sales, that sort of thing. So I know that we're having meetings with the police department as well as the fire departments to utilize their assets during the games, whether it's timeouts or the intros for puck drop, that sort of thing. So I think Adam's overall focus and the Mariners' focus is really to become or to continue engaging with the overall community and the relationships that they've started to build in the school systems, that sort of thing. So overall event mix is kind of what you're looking at on this slide and why I'm showing that there's an overall $947,000 increase in ticket revenue. On the flip side of that, when you have ticketed events, it also costs you have more increased labor to actually run these events. So the red lines, the 3 red lines that you guys see on your summary page right there is going to be your labor costs. One of the things that's largely impacting this is our 2 minimum wage increases that we have coming up. July 1, we've got the city minimum wage increase that goes from $11 to $11.11. The big one that comes up is going to be January 1st with the state minimum wage increase that will go up to $12 for For us, over the year, that's about $62,000 impact into our labor line item, which is reflected there. So that was another piece I wanted you guys to see. Even though we're increasing ticketing revenue, the caveat to that is we also are going to have the labor piece in there. Do you guys have any questions up until this point? Okay. Next, moving down, ancillary income for us. This is kind of a fun one for us. What I ended up doing was in each individual event pulling the historics for the past 3 years. We really kind of got to see the ebb and flow of attendance, our net income, and really kind of got to take a look at why the overall fluctuations were happening. And so one thing that this allowed us to do is look at the individual per cap of each event. So we had an idea if the per cap that we were putting into our budget was realistic or unrealistic. So what we've got in here are realistic per caps. Again, we've got historical information on the Mariners, and then the rest of the events also have historical information. In addition to having historical information, one of the things that we've been able to do with the concession stands is really to kind of streamline how we're operating. If you guys recall, we implemented a new POS system, which for us, it means that we get to process as many people as possible in a much quicker time period. And so a new POS system helped with that, and then also going from fountain drinks to bottled drinks. It helps us expedite the lines. If you've got a concert that has an intermission, if you have a sporting events that have different times where it's notorious for people to go to the bathroom or go to the concession stands, we have a certain amount of time to process people before they're going to want to re-engage in the event. So a great example of this, Jeff Dunham, back in 2016, we scanned in a little over 5,800 people, and our per cap for that event was $3.04. In 2019, we had 5,500 people, so we had 300 less people, and we had a $6.73 per cap. Now, do I think that we're going to increase our per cap $3 per person on each event? I would love to, but no. But what I think that this definitely highlights is our ability to be able to process people and increase the number of transactions during different events. So that's why when you go down to the total ancillary income, we've got increased projected revenue at $72,000. Moving down to our other income category, this highlights a couple of different line items here. Advertising is our first one. That is definitely has a growth opportunity for us. We have On Target, who is a founding partner of ours. Their company was absorbed by another company overseas, so they don't have anybody stateside to really kind of understand the value of what they're investing in. So I think that everybody wants to know the crystal ball effect of, well, when are we going to refill that, or when are we going to replace that? I think that a December timeline is a realistic projection to think that we could have somebody filled in that spot. We have 4 to 5 different businesses that are interested in becoming a founding partner with us. But again, that's one of those things that as it goes along, the dialogues have to happen. It's not just because July 1st hits, we instantly have a founding partner. If you look at that line item, there's a $40,000 variance for that. Our founding partnership is worth $75,000. The reason we've got 40 in there is you've got to take into consideration commissions, and then we also split some of the ticketing, the suite ticketing revenue, as well as static in-bowl static signage with the Mariners. So part of our founding partnership, based on our deal structure with the Mariners, we have to share some of our partnership revenue with them. So that's why that $75,000 is down to $40,000. And if you'll flip to 2 more slides. Perfect. So that first, again, I was really into historical information. In this first chart that you've got, what I really wanted to understand was, Zach is in charge of our partnerships. I really kind of wanted to get an understanding of what Zach's averages were, so his average contract renewals, his average contract losses, as well as his average contract gains. And based on those percentages, I worked off of last year's numbers to make sure our projections in here were realistic moving forwards, which they are. So again, there's a lot of the numbers in here are based on historical information, which sponsorship revenue is one of those. Naming rights is the next line item down. We are in year 6 of a 10-year contract with the Cross Insurance Arena, or Cross Insurance. And probably about this time next year, Zach will start having the dialogue with them again about renewing. I don't see any, at this point, we don't see any reason as to why they would not. But again, it's always the song and dance that you've got to go through to make sure that they're going to continue moving forwards. PSLs, premium seats, licenses, and suites are the next line item down. That line item has increased by $20,000. I know that several questions were asked last year. Total number of PSLs that we have to offer are 326. Right now, we have a little over 100 of those sold. Primarily, I would say about 70% of those are done through commercial sales. And then 25% of those after that are going to be through the sponsorship packages, and there's about 5% of that that's residential. So that's generally kind of how the sales on those fall. Next line item down is going to be other rentals. For us, that is going to be ice rental time. If you guys remember when we didn't have hockey, we still put ice in because a lot of the high schools utilized the ice in the off season, and it is still a hot commodity for them. It still works really well for us. The Mariners primarily practice in the mornings on days when we're not having a game, so that really has allowed for the high school teams to still be active on the ice. Generally, it's the game days where the high school teams don't get any ice time, but we naturally knew that was going to happen. Next line item down is our indirect expenses. If you will look at the chart there at the bottom, there is a $169,000 increase to that. A couple of reasons go into that. Those first two orange lines that you've got right there is reflecting about $55,000 worth of staff savings costs that we had last year. Going into this past season, there were some positions that we needed to fill. There was a staff accountant, an event manager, and then through the year there was an operations manager position that needed to be filled. So there were several months worth of savings that we saw last year that we know are not going to be there this year because at this point we are fully staffed. The next line item down is proposed wage adjustments and benefit costs increase. So this upcoming year, we've got a 2.5% cost of living increase in there for the staff, and then our cost of benefit is going to go up in 2020. Next line item down, or for us, is there's forklift rental expenses. So this line item is a bit interesting for us. It is all of the trade agreements that we have in the building. Zach, with our partnerships, in some of our deals, we have trade agreements. NITCO is a great example of that. In that agreement with NITCO, we have one of their forklifts that they allow us to use throughout the year. So one of the things that corporate wanted us to do was to reflect any and all of our trade agreements as a line item expense. So if for whatever reason the partnership had happened to go away, we had a realistic perspective of what it cost us to run the building. And to think creatively, one of my sales pitches to Jim was, hey, does the county have an extra forklift lying around so I can give NITCO back their forklift and then have that one in the building? But apparently the county doesn't just have that lying around. We tried though.
Got a couple of old cruisers.
Yeah. Yeah. So that
Oh, Joe.
forklift rental was really more of my wish list with forklift of getting that off of my trade. So that's really a trade line item for us. And then the POS, the new POS system, the annual support cost for that is $10,000, which didn't exist last year. And then marketing and promotions, there's a lot of venue signage that we want to add into the building. So that's how you get to the $169,000. We recognize that's a pretty big jump. So I wanted to make sure you guys had an accurate understanding of why that all was there. So that being said, that leads us to our net operating deficit of $385,000.
Steve?
Yeah, I'm dense, I'm lost here. You said in the events mech that the increased labor cost because of city and state is $62,000. Where's that show up?
So the way that we do our indirect expenses is that this is not going to show our event expense. So the $62,000 is going to be reflected in our event income, or in our individual events.
Gotcha.
Indirects is going to be full-time salaries.
Thanks.
Ready to move on into capital?
Maybe before we do that, does anybody have any questions, comments, issues?
I have a question. Now, is this the time to talk about the union or no?
Sure. But I think maybe that's a
That's for another day?
discussion for another time versus
Okay, fine.
this
Yep.
year's budget.
Yep.
Getting into the capital, Melanie and I worked together. She had pulled her department heads within the facility. They came with a list of different projects that Melanie presented to me, and I narrowed down for the trustees to consider. The trustees bring forth the following. As you can see, the top three are going to be bonded items. We are looking to go through a bonding process through this budget, ultimately going out to bond next summer, 2020. And the bonded items would be a brine chiller, a Free Street concourse heat, and controls replacement. I will just touch upon the controls replacement, as that is probably my number one item that needs to be done over there, and that is almost the brains of, if it's not the brains of the facility. That is what controls every mechanical device in the facility, and when that has hiccups, you have hiccups in your facility, whether it's ice making or keeping the water warm. And so it's imperative that we move forward rather quickly on getting that system up and running now that we have 36 hockey games in the building and are having a greater need of many different mechanical devices throughout the year in the building. The Free Street concourse heat, there is no heat in that section of the concourse. I can tell you a personal story. When I was walking out back to talk to the facilities director, I walked through that Free Street concourse and it was freezing during this winter. I walked into the bowl where there was ice and it was warmer in the bowl than where it was in the Free Street concourse. So,
We could be saving money, put the ice up there.
yeah, right. It was noticeably different between the two areas. And then the brine chillers, from my understanding, they are almost original to the building. They are the units that keep the ice going, and we are in need of replacement of those original units. In doing that, and Commissioner Gordon and I have talked quite a bit on this, we will be looking, and Melanie's already started discussions with some facility folks within her corporate organization around seeing whether there is the ability to engineer that system to capture the heat that is produced and refunnel it somewhere in the building so that we're capturing and redistributing all aspects of these units and offsetting a cost elsewhere in the facility. There's no guarantees, but we're definitely kicking the tires and exploring the feasibility of doing just that. Jumping down under non-debt CIP, we had a recent removal of a popcorn maker. The popcorn vendor that we were using took back their popcorn maker, and so we were in need of having a popcorn machine by the, middle of August for Cirque du Soleil?
Yep, so we've got Cirque du Soleil coming in, and I think when you look at running a regular business and then you hear popcorn maker, you're like, holy smokes, what kind of popcorn is this thing crunching out? But if you think about in the context of what we do, it really kind of makes sense for our business. Disney on Ice is a great example. For one show, we will process almost 20,000 people, and popcorn is one of the best-selling items. So then that's just one event of the 102 events that we have. So in the grand scheme of things, when you're looking at a machine to produce that amount of food, food, that's when you kind of get into that level of machine. Obviously, I don't think anybody at this point has anything like that at their house. If so, just invite me over. So that's, to me, I think that was.
I do have a commercial.
Yeah.
No, I
To
have a
me, that one,
commercial machine.
that one, I wanted you guys to have an understanding of that one.
We're jumping into a fiber infrastructure. There is a need to replace or create a more robust network within the cross-insurance arena than what we have today. And so that $25,000 allocation will do just that. The sprinkler system is a constant finding of the Portland Fire Department when they do their inspections of the facility, that our sprinkler system has some issues. The Portland Fire Department has been forgiving thus far, but their forgiveness is waning. And so we need to address that sooner than later to take care of those systems. Our condensing unit is located in a small mechanical room. It's creating a lot of heat, and we need to do something to keep this unit cool. And so there's a proposal to relocate it out of a small mechanical room in the front of the building and relocate it elsewhere within the facility, so there's greater airflow around it. The southeast lobby heat, that is the new glass facade, kind of like secondary entrance down on, what is it, Center Street and
Center and
Spring.
Center and Spring, yeah.
That is when used, there's not a whole lot of heat, and when those doors open, it is a cascading of air going right up the stairwell and cooling off that side of the building. And so we are allocating $20,000, but that's going to be a partnership because there's already mechanical infrastructure that the center has already. It's just a matter of installing it. And so I've teamed up the arena's facility director with Bruce Tarbuck's here at the county, and we're going to work with our electricians here to see whether we can install that ourselves, but there's going to be some installation fees around that. We've talked about a forklift, so Melanie's proposing to remove the trade in the operations and buy a forklift outright for the longevity of the arena. We use that almost every show. And then there's a offsetting. There is going to be the sale of an asset, and that's the subfloor. There is an arena within the Spectra organization that has inquired about our old subfloor. As the commissioners may or may not remember, in this current budget, we had the purchase of a new subfloor. That came in, was cut to fit November, December, and that has allowed us to put into surplus our old inadequate subfloor that is pretty banged up and doesn't fit tight to the ice anymore. And so we will be selling that at an estimated revenue of $30,000 to offset some of this non-debt CIP. So I'll pause there. Did I miss anything in explanation or anything, Melanie?
The only thing with the sale of the subfloor is we would look to purchase a plywood covering to go over the new floor. One of the things that we will look to do moving forwards is monster trucks is one of the events that we host, when you bring all of the dirt in. One of the things that we've seen with the historic analysis that we did, one of the first times they were in the building, we netted about $74,000 from that event. As time has gone on, that event has it's been booked later in April, which is a little bit warmer, and as I'm learning, Mainers love to be outside as soon as there's sunshine, which I do as well. And so it's impacted the overall ticket sales. So what I would ideally like to do is try and book that event in March when we still have hockey going on. You can do monster truck shows on top of ice. A lot of our buildings actually do them, but there's a way to put your subfloor down. You put plastic on top of that, and then you put plywood on top of that, and another layer of plastic. So it's almost like lasagna on top of your ice. So you can protect it, have the show, and then pull all of that off. But we would want to have that plywood on top of it. So we would take some of the money that we made from the sale of the old subfloor to purchase the plywood. So that's why you see that piece of it there.
Good catch. I put it in the notes, but I didn't talk about it, so thank you. Any questions on the capital before we move on to the trustees' budget?
The only question I have is your forklift used year-round?
It is. Yep. On all of the
There's
events.
nothing light in the back of the house.
There's not, no. So we do actually have two of them, and primarily what happens when you've got any kind of show coming in, we've got two loading docks. So they won't unload one truck at a time. It's almost like a tandem. You have two forks going, and so you can unload two trucks at a time. So it's cost savings there. Yep.
Jumping over to the trustees' budget. Just for comparison's sake, because of the change in the trustees, I've included 5 years worth of trustees' budget. I think the 2017-18 year was the highest of any of the years of a budget amount of $276,683. As you can see, the current year, the 2018-19, there was a significant change as the transition of the arena came under the county. We were able to get a number of efficiencies with the partnership now. We no longer have a staff person for the trustees. We were able to get rid of the storage facility. We weren't paying benefits. We weren't paying taxes for the employee. And so that has really allowed us to streamline this budget. However, there's still a cost associated with the budget. This year, I'm bringing forth a request of $18,000, or the trustees are bringing forth a request of $18,000 on the professional services, which is down from $20,000 this year. Keeping the board meetings at $1,200, and that is it for the top part. But I'll bring down to the management incentive fee, which is by contract, that the partnership that we have with Spectra. There are a number of benchmarks that every August, September, we will go through with Melanie or the Spectra staff and see how those benchmarks were met. They are predetermined benchmarks that were established at the time of signing the contract 3 years ago now, 4 years ago, somewhere in that area. And they run the gamut. As you can see, 2 years ago, we paid $76,700. This current year, I estimated around $80,000, and next year, I've estimated about $87,000. It will go up. There's no doubt about it, because knowing the benchmarks and how they are derived, it's based on putting events in the building and butts in the seats. And when you have those two things, you start generating sales out of the concessions and other factors. And so with an additional 36 hockey games added into the arena, you're going to have an increase in the incentive just by having a hockey team in there now. And so I've just spitballed 87.5. I think that's more of a median than what it will be. But we'll see when we get there. Running down to the bottom part, that is the insurances. Last year, Alex and I worked to see what kind of insurances we needed or what we could fold into our existing policies or just get rid of altogether because we no longer had an employee, and so we were able to get rid of the unemployment and the workers' comp and things like that. So we were able to fine-tune the bottom part quite a bit, so that right now we have our liability package is at 74.5. Our auto, because we do have a truck that is used by Spectrum employees, we have that at $2,000. And so the total of the top and the bottom is $183,200, which would be the trustees' budget for the 19-20 fiscal year. Any questions on that? Great. Seeing none, I don't have anything more. Melanie, do you?
No, thanks for your hard work and pulling it all together. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Our next steps with this budget is I really wanted to present it to you in a workshop format. My intent is to bring it before you on June 11th. We'll probably give you the clip notes for that meeting, but we'll ask for acceptance of the budget at that meeting.
I appreciate that, Jim. I'd like to have it in this forum, gives it more freewheeling.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Melanie.
Good, thanks.
Let us know what you decide on that power line.
We're being recorded, Jim.
Back in the garage. Commissioners, okay, good.
We have the county jail next?
County jail, yes. County jail is in front of you in the packet. I would love to say that the county jail budget fits nicely into a slideshow, but it really doesn't. And so we're gonna be working off on paper on that. It is on our website, so that if anyone who is viewing this tape at a later date wants to refer to the jail budget, they can refer to the county's website to view it. But I'm going to ask Alex to run through the revenues and expenditures, and we'll welcome Naldo, the sheriff, and Major Courts here to answer any fine particulars of the jail budget that you may have.
Should they come up to the table so we're not hollering all the
Sure.
way back?
I'm going to ask, I'll sort of give sort of the quick overview of this. You know, the amazing thing, and you've all heard me say this before, the jail budget is a very, very large budget. Slow seasonal fluctuation to it. Over the course of every couple of years, it sort of tails up and tails down. We are putting a small increase into that for the next year, and hoping that it doesn't backfire. This is nothing compared to as high as it's been in the past, so that's going up to 2,650, which is well below what it'll come in for the current year, but still playing it safe. On the flip side, though, again, is another drop in the ICE inmates. So INS is ICE inmates. That went up last year and then promptly went right back down again this last year. Then the other number that is going up, and that looks like something that looks pretty set in stone, is the other county inmates going from around 300,000 up to 500,000. That 500,000 is well below what will come in during the current year. It is still a conservative estimate, and that is based on a couple of existing contracts that look like they will continue well into the coming year for those. So the net result of all three of those, of all those various moving parts, is about $242,000 in additional revenue that we feel comfortable projecting for next year as not being overly optimistic. Now, down below that line is the 4% increase that we are allowed to do to county taxes. That 4% increase would be $525,000. Add up those two numbers right there, and you get $767,000 in additional revenues that we are allowed to bring into the jail, which at first glance sounds like, great, that's a bunch to work with. The great news here is we're not talking about the state funding at all. We are projecting it to be the same as last year, end of discussion. There's no hand-wringing or anything like that. It is what we can reasonably expect to get. Now, there is a possibility it could be more, but it is just a possibility. So our margin for error is on the positive side here, but it would be unwise for us to budget for anything more than what we are presently slated to get. There is also the possibility that the present jail funding will definitely be an increase, but part of the formula for that increase is that those funds have to go back into the prior fiscal year, not the current fiscal year. If so, we will make it work, but it will not affect this budget. So,
Why?
what's that?
Why?
Why what?
Why do they have to go back?
Because that's the way the statute is written. Okay, so 700.
enough.
Yeah.
If that sounds like a reason, okay.
I think what's coming our way
because,
as it comes our way.
There goes in the bank.
$767,000 is the revenue increase to work with. Then what I would suggest is we go back to the top page, which is the wages. And you're going to quickly see most of that go away very, very, very quickly. If you go into wages and salaries, the $200,000 increase is a straight 2.5% salary increase, nothing more, nothing less. It's a very simple math to get to that number. The next number looks good, which is overtime going up by $190,000. However, most of that is a shift. For the longest time, we have budgeted roughly $220,000 down in training, education. We do that because of the cost of training. Anytime you send somebody to training, it causes an overtime cost because that person is going to the training either in addition to the regular work week, or it's causing somebody else to have to fill that person's shift on overtime. The problem is the way our accounting structure is set up, overtime goes into overtime. It just goes into that line item. And so we've typically underspent in this line item and overspent in overtime. We got asked about that at the Finance Committee a few times last summer, and it's a tough question to ask. We are recommending that that simply be moved from training into overtime to simply put it where it's being placed. So unfortunately, there is no addition there. It is simply us moving it from one line to the other. In addition to basically another $30,000, which is the 2.5%. Next up is health insurance. That's a 5% increase, which is just us taking a conservative look at what it'll go up. The following one is an interesting one, which is retirement. You'll see that that's a pretty large jump, given that the retirement cost itself isn't expected to go up. That is as a result of the audit that I do every year, where I take a look at all of the employees we've got, what they're signing up for, and what's going on. And what's really interesting here is a good thing that hurts the budget in the short term. Our new folks are all signing up for main purse, all of them. Without a doubt. And a few years ago, that wasn't happening. We weren't getting 100% sign up. Now we're getting it. But that means we've got to beef up the budget here a little bit. And it's as straightforward as that. And that'll cause that impact pretty quickly. And again, a couple of years ago, back when I was doing this, that wasn't happening. It's a good thing. It obviously means that there is always the chance that these folks will actually retire when they get to retirement age, as opposed to a scenario that we often find, which is people just holding on to try to stay working there after a point in time when they really should be retiring. Boom, there's 630,000 out of 767 gone, just like that.
Does the retirement also, does that indicate that more people are saying, yeah, I'm gonna be here for 20 years? I mean, sort of or is that just, because that's good news too, I mean,
Yes.
right, so.
And certainly one of the ways that and I will say this, hopefully, yes, absolutely, hopefully, yes. But one of the things that I will often say to employees who are asking about this is, listen, even if you make it 5 years with us, that, after that 5-year mark, that is money that you may forget about for the next 40 years, but you're going to come back to it, and it's going to be an actual retirement plan, as opposed to a pot of money that may run dry, as opposed to worrying that you're going to outlive your money. That's something that you can actually keep with you. And that message is obviously working very well with this new crowd, because they're all signing up for it.
I also think there's a renewed emphasis on onboarding of new employees, and there's a more explanation of the retirement benefits that we offer today versus in the past.
Good.
And so I think with that new way of onboarding, it's resulting in more people signing up
Yeah,
from day one.
I think it's a good
Excellent.
thing that we get more people signing up for retirement. I mean, that shows all kinds of good things, and it's a line item bump here, but on down the way, it'll get more, it'll help all of us out.
Now, this really quick overview doesn't get into the details of a lot of the various changes that the major has discussed, a lot of the moving parts and a lot of the repositioning he's looking to do, but those are not pieces that necessarily affect these big picture lines. So if he wants to talk about those down, once we get through this, we can come back to it. But ultimately, it's just trying to find a way to make all these parts fit within the money that we've got. And so I'll just keep on going and then possibly just let folks circle back through. Because after this, you're going to see an awful lot of numbers that don't change. And that's something I think we've all seen a fair amount year in and year out on this budget. A lot of these lines are very similar year in and year out. The change to transportation and lodging is them sending more folks to the Spillman conference, and the Spillman software is basically what runs the entire jail. Do you want to speak more to what's going on with that?
So, with transportation and lodging, Spillman is one of the avenues. Also, some of the training conferences, especially for ACA, we have an audit coming up. We have a good opportunity this year. It's in Boston, to maximize the amount of people we can send to get exposed to that, get some pretty decent training that you would probably have to go a different part of the U.S. to go to. So I think in preparation for ACA, I think it's a good opportunity to explore that. Also with Spillman, that's another avenue that we just need the expertise with the jail management system. And sad enough, I think it's in Utah, so it isn't in New England, which is a challenge.
How many people are we talking in total here? Just a ballpark.
You mean for ACA in a perfect world, I'd like to at least send 6 to Boston, and not for the whole conference, just different segments. Again, I just want to take advantage of it being in New England. Usually we only send like 1 or 2.
How long does that take you to cycling people through?
Some of the positions that we have, like the ACA coordinator, the FRIA coordinator, these are positions that they have to just be brought up to speed with the new trends, policies, expectations. So they pretty much go at least once a year. We're just trying to get other people involved, like when it comes to vendors, new technology. So I'm just trying to get maybe the property person, classification, education, try to get some more grants, explore what kind of programs across the country are working, and see if we can have it fit in at Cumberland County.
The next line of note that's got a change in it is a $24,000 increase to legal services. That has a great deal due to the fact that we are coming up on a contract year here. Also just simply the fact that it's more and more showing that that's a line that we need to have a fair amount into. It should probably not come as any surprise that the jail manages to have a lot of legal issues crop up during the course of the year. That's not really going to go away, but during a contract year in particular, that's a line that needs to go up a bit. The other one, and of course this is the next really big one, is that line ubiquitously titled Contract Special Services, which is really inmate medical costs. That is basically year 2 of us working with Armor. While that is a very large number, it's really just tied to CPI for them. It's tied to the fact that they're having a lot of the same issues with their staff that everyone else is, which is a need to pay more to get the folks to simply keep the staff they've got. It's also tied to the fact that over time, we're not getting quite as much back from these folks each and every year. So that's a line that needs, it's unfortunately probably going to keep going up for a few more years to come, if I were to hazard a guess. And it's a big one, and it eats into a lot of the budget, unfortunately. After that, the next one that I would maybe highlight of note is food and groceries down there, which is about $24,000. There's a couple of different things going on here. One is certainly the major has done an excellent job of bringing some of those costs down from the prior year, but there's still a budgeted need that's going to need to go up. Food costs are rising. And this is one of those areas where all those additional federal inmates and all those additional county inmates that do in fact provide revenue also need to eat. And so that's a line item that will go up as the average daily population goes up. The records one, line item going to 65,000. I can't remember what the additional need there was, to be honest. I'm blanking on it right now. It may have just been tied to,
Clothing.
the clothing line. Sorry, I was missing it. Yep. So that's just something that's been trending in that direction. The next one of note is the vehicle line. They do need to replace a transport van. That's going to cost more than a standard vehicle. And then the tasers are all coming up on needing to be replaced, which is why you're seeing an increase there. Those are the various increases. And again, that's how a $20 million budget can be talked about very, very quickly, because by its very nature, a jail is very constant. A lot of these expenses are the same expenses year in and year out. Are there not 20 other lines here that all could and should be increased? Absolutely. But that $767,000 increase is the hard number where there's actually room to go. And unfortunately, like with most years, it all tends to go away in a hurry. So that's the bad news. I guess the good news is, again, we are not endlessly fretting over state funding, at least. And that's sort of my 10,000-foot overview of the jail budget, for what it's worth.
I have two questions.
Go ahead.
Is office supplies, is ever more than training supplies? Can you explain the $26,000 for office supplies?
Office supplies are ink, paper, the things you would use in an office. The training supplies are more like when they qualify targets and stuff. So we don't buy a lot of training supplies. But the office supplies, there's a lot of office supplies consumed over the course of a year.
Oh.
Yep. Lots of paper.
Think of intake alone.
Paper?
Right.
And the forms that are generated every time somebody comes in, and the amount that needs to be distributed all over the place. It's just such a factory through there in terms of just the amount of work that needs to go through those line
What would
items.
happen about, well, this is probably before Jim, is going with paperless with the county, paperless. Did we throw that out the window with the baby, or?
Going to have to talk a couple of judges into that, and that's not going to happen soon, I don't think.
Yeah, and the other thing, I mean, we'd like to be a lot more paperless than we are, but, you know, the technology, well, like Spillman, you know, the reason we're sending people out is so they understand Spillman, because sometimes, you know, Aaron Gilpatrick and his crew do a phenomenal job, but there are some times when we might be able to use that database a lot more efficiently if we just ask the question.
Right.
And Aaron's not gonna be looking at it from a corrections point of view, so that's why we send
Right,
people
okay.
out. But again, there are some limitations on that. I mean, in a perfect world, we would be like Walt Disney, but we'd have to throw a lot of money into it as far as tracking and all this other stuff. So we're slowly moving corrections into a paperless, but the judges, the court systems still need paper. And there are certain things that we still need to resort to paper on.
I was just surprised at that. Okay, yeah.
Even to prepare a budget costs paper.
You know, and
I'll
along
give you a
those,
ream of paper.
we are slowly but surely moving our payroll process into a more paperless environment.
Right.
But it's going to happen slowly by bits and pieces. And if that actually causes some decreases to offer supplies, we'll decrease that line item when the
Right.
line starts to go down from it. But
Is the non-food items in the kitchen, the $5,000, is that napkins and plates and
Styrofoam, paper products.
Yeah, that's what I figured, okay.
spatulas.
You know, anytime we have to shut down the kitchen, and we just had to do it for repairs, you know, you lose the dishwasher because you can't go in there for construction purposes, so we were using styrofoam and stuff to get through.
No, it makes sense.
You may want to look at that line, because styrofoam,
No,
I
this-
believe,
yeah.
is now banned in the state of Maine through this legislature.
Well, I say styrofoam, I mean, it's probably, we've talked about alternatives.
Paper, yeah.
but, I mean, styrofoam seems to be
That's
the
the
default.
cheapest. That's
Yeah.
the cheapest material out there. That's why you see it so often. But you start, like Dunkin'
Right.
Donuts changing over to their eco-friendly coffee cup is a little bit more expensive per cup versus the styrofoam cup. So it might be something we want to talk
But
about.
weren't there some exceptions on that? I was surprised at the exceptions on that. I think there's some exceptions, and I don't know if this would fall under an exception. Because it's not, you know, it's not actually going out.
There is actually no one knows this, but there was a 1991
Oh.
law on the books already that bans plastic coffee stirrers and styrofoam in public buildings. No one abides by it, but it's on the books.
Steve?
In the grocery thing, have we ever explored the opportunity to deal with the marketplace where the farmers, the local farmers and so forth?
We did.
Yeah, okay,
Um,
fair enough, that's just, yeah, okay. The other nasty question here I have is, the other county inmates, do we have a per diem rate?
65, I believe that's what we're charging.
yeah, I think that's what we ended up falling on, right, 65,
Okay.
to be consistent.
Which counties are we dealing
Yeah,
with?
where are they
right
from?
now?
Right now, it's Oxford.
York and just Penobscot, my phone.
Yeah. York, Penobscot,
And then here and there, we'll get one or two from other counties, just because we have 24-hour medical, we have the resources to deal with it.
What's Oxford County
I
doing,
think so.
you know?
they're at Two Bridges.
Two Bridges, right.
I heard a
They just bumped.
rumor,
Yeah.
for what it's worth, that there was a possibility that Two Bridges might be shutting down a pod, but I don't know if that's wrong.
Okay.
That's out there.
And what's our pod situation?
Two closed.
Two closed,
Okay,
And the rest are fairly full.
rest are packed right in?
How about professional services? What's the increase there, $5,400?
Partially, that's just catching up to it. That is not so much legal, but if we send somebody in to do, say, an internal investigation on an employee issue or any kind of above and beyond.
Fitness for duty, polygraphs if we have to go outside, although we've got a polygraphist internally, but if he's out, we have to go outside.
Sure.
That falls in there. The legal one, I want to kind of talk about that a little bit. What we're seeing is a lot of increases on freedom of information requests that, we've kind of,
There's your paper increase right there.
that too. But, things like hold this and, for the time being, and asking for things that are out of the norm, so we have to go to an attorney and have he or she research it. So we're really starting to see a lot of FOIA requests. And they're not the typical ones. They're the ones like, if you get it wrong,
You may not have a problem with the person requesting it, but you may have a problem with the other side. So we're starting to see a huge increase on it.
Oh, wow. So,
Flavor of the month.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I don't have anything.
Question, well, didn't we just buy a vehicle?
Yeah, that 12,000 is to outfit the vehicle you bought. So that's why it's $12,000.
Oh, I see.
Cages, lights.
Yeah, what we ended up
Okay,
doing
gotcha.
was, there was some money set aside last year,
Yep,
and there wasn't enough to outfit it correctly.
oh, I see,
So
okay.
what we were gonna do is, we found this, is we buy it out of this year's budget.
Budget, and then next
and
year's budget.
Outfit
Okay,
it. So it's
gotcha.
basically sitting in a lot until July 1st, when it will be outfitted.
Okay, okay, but, gotcha.
It's something along the line of this, because, and I think I believe we ought to know it, is that the sheriff has been trying to utilize the jail and take advantage of the pods that are not being utilized right at the moment. And I'd like to have him explain what's going on in the legislature, what we've tried, and that it's kind of just fallen off the edge of the table.
Yeah, and I may call on the major, because he sat in for me while I was on vacation, but for the last two sessions, Representative Farnsworth put in front of the legislature, in front of criminal justice, the thought that we could take one of the empty pods and lease it to the state. That empty pod would be staffed by mental health professionals, DHHS folks, if you will, and that we would take any people, and there's a lot of list of competency exam, people that are on a competency exam. We have, on any given day, 3 or 4, and we would take all the other folks from the other 14 jails, and we would create a competency unit, taking a little pressure off Riverview, so that it would open their beds up for people that really were in crisis. And actually, Representative Farnsworth did it twice, Senator Grozovsky did it one other time. So we've made 3 attempts. It was presented in front of DHHS this year. It got a favorable vote. Well, I shouldn't say that. There was nobody against it, and a lot of people for it, the idea. It went to work session. I was on vacation. I asked the major, who was the next person in line that probably could defend what the vision was. He went up to that work session, and that's when Riverview sent some folks down, and what they wanted to do, in essence, is take one of those pods and make it a mini mental health unit similar to at the prison, where we would take people that were pulling shanks, throwing people around, being assaultive, et cetera, and we would actually run that. And they would take the competency exams, the people that are really not much of a problem, and take those folks up there. So I know that when, did I leave
No.
anything out?
Hit it right on the nose.
So when I found out about that on vacation, I did send an email to Representative Farnsworth saying, if this starts going down the track of taking on being a mental health unit, then we're out. I would not put the taxpayers, you folks, in line, because this would be way out of our scope. This would be liability to the nth degree, and why would I put you folks or any taxpayers in that spot? So it's still making its way through. Representative Farnsworth said he would keep me in touch with what's going on, but I've basically told them, after this, we're done. It's the state's problem to figure it out. And we'll just, there was a little bit that we could gain, because when I have somebody that needs to be force medicated or needs to be in a hospital, there would be an empty bed, and we would be taking care of these folks that really are just being evaluated day after day. But, in the end, we don't need a mini mental health unit at the jail. The liability is enormous. The training because they expect us to staff it, is beyond our level, and really, we're doing what we can right now to deal with our own staffing. Did I leave anything out, Major?
No?
That's what usually happens. I mean, we get the idea of leasing it to somebody else and letting them run it so that so people are secure, they're not gonna run away or walk off the site makes all kinds of sense, because but then they always, the state looks at it and says, well, how can we, we'll take the easy part, you take the hard part, and oh, by the way, you have to staff it now. I mean, we've been around that merry-go-round a couple of times.
We have. I mean, the last time, DHHS froze at the altar, I would say.
Yeah.
The first time, it quickly became the idea that, well, wait a minute, you take the folks that are really Riverview doesn't want, and we'll take all the others. And at that time, said, no, we're not gonna do it. So, this is 3 times. I honestly, I'm not gonna spend a whole lot of effort at this point. It really is a state issue, and, it really turns to, okay, they gotta do something about it.
Too bad. It could have been a good partnership,
Yeah.
the way it was initially thought and proposed.
So, and it's not gonna get any better. I mean, the competency exams, they're getting more intense, more frequent, and we're just gonna have to deal with it. We do have a mini program. I will credit Justice Mills, Lieutenant Scott Jordan, the DA's office, our mental health staff, and they're trying to work at a very low level to get some of these folks into court. But even at that, when somebody needs a little bit more advanced competency exam, they're going on a waiting list, and those folks get priority over the people that really should be in a hospital. And there have been 5 times in my 8 years that I've basically had to threaten to call a press conference if I couldn't get a bed for somebody that really needed to be there over somebody that was on a court order list. So I guess we'll just plodge through.
All right, with those good news. Any other questions?
Well, I think this is a big improvement over past years.
Yes, it is.
Yes, there's no question
At least
about that.
Now it's like, how do we make this thing run better, not panic stations for where we're gonna get the money to keep the lights on.
Yeah, and we're not having a discussion of shutting it down. So
Exactly, yeah, so, I mean, I'm, kudos to everybody here, but I'm
Is this also
really-
coming up June 11th, Jim?
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Okay,
Yeah, great job on the budget, everyone.
agree, yes.
Alex, Jim, and
very understandable, very clear.
and
Thanks.
Sheriff's Department. Thank you.
It was a budget that was presented to Alex and I it was very well done.
Yes.
And so it was easy for us.
And we always say this, you guys are operating on a thin dime, and you do it every year.
Yeah.
and we
Well, I have to
appreciate it.
credit the chief and the major, because they're the ones that had to convince me, and it was easy to do.
So June 11th, our meeting is going to be here,
Yes.
regular
That's a
time.
Tuesday night?
Have we made a decision to go on the road this summer?
I am in contact with 2 municipalities, and it's not going smoothly, to say the least, in terms of scheduling, because they have meetings in the room that we need to be in and things like that. So I'm still working. I'll know more by June 11th, if not before then.
Okay. So June 11th is a Tuesday, the day before being an event that the county
County's Feeney
participates in.
tournament.
Yep, so, okay.
Perfect, thank you.
See you all then, thank you.
Jim,
Yep.
I think I sent one to you, I don't know if that's the same one or not, but,